Steep rock has been described as the most unusual tribute to the profession of engineering in Canada's industrial history. When in 1948 this chapter of the steep rock story was completed, the company's first mine was established as the country's largest producer of high-grade iron ore to that date. Ore in the ground was roughly valued at 4 times the total national budget of the same period. The first chapter is the story of transforming a wilderness lake in northwestern Ontario into North America's first major new source of premium iron ore in many years. This was an $18 million gamble on geological reports and engineers' opinions. The presence of float ore, fragments from an undiscovered ore body left on the lake shore by glacial action, had been known for 50 years. Diamond drills had hit ore on the bottom of the lake, but not 1 ton of ore could be mined, nor could the commercial importance of the deposits be more than guessed at, until the whole job was done and the money for it all spent. That was the gamble. Steep Rock Lake was a link in the Seine River system, which drained westward through Lake of the Woods to Hudson's Bay. The first step was to cut Steep Rock Lake out of the Seine system. The second, to remove much of the lake itself and much of the lake bed. By a complicated series of rock cuts and new channels, dams, and a tunnel, a plan was worked out to detour the Seine River system around the eastern arm of Steep Rock Lake in which ore bodies appeared to lie, then block off that section of the lake for pumping. The venture began in the spring of 1943, a peak period for wartime shortages in manpower and materials. But no looming shortage was more critical than the fast-dwindling reserve of high-grade iron ore in America. To other problems, there was added the need for speed. 22 miles of roads, bridges, camps, and housing were constructed. The plan was to replace Steep Rock in the Seine system by Finlayson Lake. But Finlayson was higher than Steep Rock and higher than Marmion Lake, which drained into Steep Rock. First, it had to be lowered. This would be done by driving a tunnel 10 by 12 feet into Finlayson Lake below the surface to drain it off to its new level. At the same time, a permanent new outlet from Finlayson was planned. Its mouth, the esker cut 140 feet deep and 200 feet wide, which would empty into a new channel cleared through the bush 300 feet wide and leading 4 miles to the far end of Steep Rock. By July, the tunnel was ready. The plug was pulled in Finlayson Lake by blowing out the last few feet of lake bed in a single blast. At the lower end, the water, forcing the dynamite gases ahead of it, boiled out and into the new channel. With the tunnel lowering Finlayson 6 inches a day, the esker cut was made ready to take over as soon as the new level of the lake was reached. The lake was held back by a small natural earth dam till the tunnel finished its drainage job. Then this plug was also blown and the Finlayson outlet was finished. At the other end of Finlayson Lake, the plan was to use small Raft Lake in constructing an outlet from Marmion Lake, which had drained into Steep Rock. Diesel and gasoline pumps lowered the small lake so work could begin. Heavy equipment was moved in for the excavation job of cutting the channel. Rock cuts 100 feet wide and 60 to 90 feet deep were excavated, which would carry the flow into Raft Lake and out again en route to Finlayson. A 900-foot spillway and control works at Raft Lake would control the level of Marmion Lake. It was a red-letter day when, right on schedule, preparations were completed to blow out the last plug on the new channel. This was the first flow of Seine River water over the new course. Ore-bearing bays of Steep Rock had been bypassed. Marmion Lake was now draining into Raft through the east cut, over the spillway and out through the west cut, on into Finlayson Lake, then along its 5-mile length and out again through the Esker Cut and the new channel to the west bay of Steep Rock. And here, cascading over a small falls, the river route rejoined its original course in the west bay of Steep Rock. There remained the job of sealing off the eastern sections of Steep Rock Lake, where the diamond drills had first located ore. This was done by constructing 2 dams, completed late in 1943. Now began the major task of pumping out a lake, much of it under severe winter conditions and below zero temperatures. 7 barges, each equipped with 2 24-inch pumps driven by 500 horsepower motors, were set up. Discharge pipes with flexible couplings stretched to the shore. As the lake level was lowered, ice was removed, the barges shoved further out, and the pipelines lengthened. When this scene was filmed in January 1944, the pumps were discharging at a rate of approximately 1 million gallons every 3 minutes, sufficient water to supply 17 of the largest cities in Canada. The lake level was dropping 6 inches a day, and by March, it was down 45 feet. By the spring breakup of 1944, slightly less than a year after the huge engineering program of diversion and drainage began, the floor of Steep Rock Lake was becoming exposed. The mining of iron ore calls for no processing in the customary sense, but for an operation in which tonnages are recorded in millions, large-scale ore handling and shipping facilities must be developed. These two had to be well advanced before the first ton of Steep Rock ore was in sight at the lake bed. At the property, a crushing plant and conveyor system were constructed. Ore is dumped into the crusher, goes next to the screening plant. Gates operated by compressed air pass the screened ore directly into railway ore cars. A spur line was built by Canadian National Railways to the Steep Rock plant from its own junction point at Atikokan, Ontario. Approximately 140 miles to the east by direct rail line is the Canadian Lakehead, upper end of the freshwater route to United States and Canadian iron ore markets. There at Port Arthur, the Canadian government started construction of one of the largest high-level ore docks on the Great Lakes. A layer or mat of concrete was poured over piles driven into the harbor bottom. The dock was then erected on this mat. Slips, for loading ore freighters were dredged at each side. A ramp over the Port Arthur railroad yards permits ore trains to move out on the dock itself. Back at Steep Rock, the long-awaited day when the first section of the first ore body would at last be exposed is fast approaching. Overburn is being washed off by high-pressure water jets or monitors, and the liquid sludge or mud so formed pumped away by a dredge. The ore is not yet in sight, but it is close. The reddish material seen here is a layer of rock covering the edge of the ore. This was the first of a series of historic moments. Steep Rock produced its first ore. As the late General Hogarth, then president, remarked, it was at last possible to set foot on the hallowed ground to reach which so much time, energy, and money had been expended. The first truckload of ore is dumped as mine executives watch. The date is October 1944. At the crusher plant, the first car of Steep Rock ore is loaded and inspected by Watkins Samuel, then chief engineer. The first ore train leaves the mine. Note the spruce tree on the first car. This is a tradition which started in 1890 on the Mesabi Range. When miners could find no American flag to plant on the first carload shipped, they used a spruce instead. Today, the same ritual is observed by each new producing iron mine. The strategic location is even more obvious now than it was at the start. There is the single short rail haul by Canadian National from Steep Rock itself to the Lakehead ore dock in Port Arthur. From that point, long-established Great Lakes shipping routes link directly with the continent's chief ore-using industrial centers. As ore trains unload at Port Arthur, the ore is graded by distributing ore from the cars into the dock's 100 bins. The dock capacity is 30,000 tons. Lake freighters are loaded through chutes, which can pour their cargo into holes in 3 hours. The loaded ore carriers then depart for the steel plants of Canada and the United States. The following scenes of Steep Rock were taken between 1945 and 1949, and the next chapter of the Steep Rock story began early in 1950 with an expansion program aimed to increase output to 4 million tons per year, a step toward an ultimate production of 10 million tons yearly. Recent developments indicate that as much as 1,000 million tons of ore may eventually be mined from the bed of Steep Rock Lake. But the development, unique in so many respects, is also unique in its pattern of cooperation to mutual advantage between private industry, governments, and agencies of governments. In this case, those of two countries. As the key representative of the Canadian government, Honorable C.D. Howe, as Minister of Supply in wartime and Minister of Trade in peacetime, along with the staffs of his departments, played a leading part in the successful achievement of creating his country's first large supply and reserve of high-grade iron. Financing came in part from agencies of the United States government, but on a basis which does not disturb ownership of the properties. The province of Ontario has been an active factor in the growth of Steep Rock from the start. Its Hydroelectric Power Commission solved the early problem of power and now supplies all requirements for production and development. The federally owned Canadian National Railways provides rail service and operates the ore docks. For the government agencies, Steep Rock is a profitable customer as well as an undertaking of international importance. But any achievement marked by the faith and vision as well as the hard driving action which has characterized Steep Rock must also be a story of people and personalities. There are few pictorial records of the men who worked together to bring about those individual accomplishments, which taken together add up to the unusual record of Canadian growth and development. Here are some of those who have left their imprint in iron. Cyrus S. Eaton, Cleveland industrialist, was the single key figure in the iron and steel industries who believed in Steep Rock's future greatness before it reached the blueprint stage, and who was prepared to back up this belief by the years of personal effort as chairman of the board required to change possibilities into actualities. To the late Major General Donald M. Hogarth as president, Steep Rock appeared as an opportunity without parallel on which he concentrated his great organizing ability during the final years of his career. He saw in it the means of closing one great gap in the Canadian economy by developing the iron ore supply which Canada had never had, and of building a permanent foundation on which prosperity for the section of Canada in which he was most interested could be soundly based. In the group seen here, the central figure is the late Joseph Errington, who with Jules Cross launched the undertaking. The chief engineer and later consulting engineer, Watkins Samuel. Hugh Roberts, geologist and iron ore authority, whose scientific opinion it was that Steep Rock would prove to be one of the outstanding iron mines of the world. Among the engineers is the young Canadian M.S. Fotheringham, who went to the property as manager when Steep Rock's working staff was a geologist and a single Indian boatman, and who 12 years later had moved up to the presidency. Steep Rock is a tribute to the men who actually did the job, often under difficult conditions. The scenes which have just been shown are the simple record of actual happenings, filmed as they occurred. Much of their interest and value lies in the fact that shortly before they took place, they were still widely considered to be improbable parts of a visionary dream existing only in the minds of those men, public and private citizens alike, who were determined to make the whole story come true.